Hey, it is Wednesday, November 12th, 2025. Boy, 2025 just flew by in a blink. We are hosting Direct Line. The host is Mark Unver and myself, Dwight Patel, filling in for the vacationing Jackie Saxton. Our guest today is Ambassador James Gilmore from Virginia, former governor, former attorney general, including you're also a prosecutor too, I believe, right, in Henrico County?
Yeah, I've had a lot of things in my bag of tricks. I've been I've been a private trial attorney, prosecutor, attorney general, governor, and ambassador. So I've been around.
Well, let me
Welcome to
lead
the
off.
show.
Yeah, well, welcome. It's great to have you
Thank,
back.
thank
And
you. I'm
and
glad to be back.
and looking back earlier in the year, and obviously reading a lot of the rather extensive commentary that you've done, you have been something of a skeptic about the willingness of Vladimir Putin to negotiate in the war between Russia and Ukraine. There had been a flurry of activity, and I think hope that perhaps those negotiations would go farther than they have. I think you were always a skeptic. I think you get a little bit of "I told you so." But let me give you the opportunity to kind of expand on that. And where do you see things standing now, and what can we look forward to in the future?
I don't think that the geopolitics of the war has changed at all. I think that the battlefield is debatable. We can talk about that. That changes every day, and you get different reports every day from the battlefield. But strategically, I don't think that things have changed at all. Uh, the uh, the Russians, led by Vladimir Putin, I think their strategic objectives remain the same. And the question is, can Putin achieve those strategic objectives? I have said up to this point that he cannot, and he hasn't, and he can't. But he's pouring a lot of people into this. He's lost now 1.1 million citizens and soldiers wounded and dead. That's a big lot of chips to put at the middle of the table. So he doesn't intend to walk away from this. But his strategic objectives, in my opinion, have remained the same. And there's nothing, it's not mysterious. He said what it is, which is the destruction totally of Ukraine. And then using that to absorb those people and that territory into a new Russian empire. And then to expand that empire, probably into the Baltics, and ultimately try to reestablish Russian influence over Eastern Europe and through that the politics of Western Europe. And my position has been continuously that that is not in the American national interest. That Europe is an essential ally to the United States, and Russia cannot be permitted to succeed in their strategic objectives. Now, the strategic objective of the Ukrainians is quite simple. They don't want to be destroyed. They want to continue to be a country as they are today, and they don't intend to be subsumed and into the Russian Empire. They remember very well the Holodomor that Stalin impressed upon them. They almost the total destruction of the Ukrainian people, genocide really, and they anticipate that again, and they don't want to live under Russian rule. When I was in Ukraine, they made it clear to me they were not Russians and they didn't intend to become Russians. So those are the mark that none of that's changed. There's been a lot of back and forth on that. President Trump's been in the middle of that now for over a year and has not been able to succeed because Putin doesn't have any interest in negotiating a settlement that's not to his favor. Now, let me be clear. I think that he would go willfully and cheerfully to the negotiating table if he was going to be handed that which he's trying to win on the battlefield. And that's his terms right now. His terms are complete capitulation of the Ukrainians and the destruction of Ukraine as a nation. I don't think that that's the kind of negotiation that Ukraine should engage in. So that's where I think we are, Mark, at this point.
So when the war started, it's been now about 3.5 years. I think there was the expectation that the mix of Ukrainian resistance, the provision of defensive weapons to Ukraine to enable that, and economic sanctions and how shall I say, a more steadfast Europe, Western Europe, NATO countries than perhaps in the past on the issue of Russia, that the costs to Putin would become unbearable. And at some point, whether it's the mix of economic sanctions or the casualties of the resistance of Ukraine, would cause Putin to change. It does seem now, I think, feels that more of a war of attrition, and we're all, I think, taken aback. I don't think many expected for Russia and for Putin to be able or willing to take the level of losses that they have been prepared to do. And I think it's given a lot of people that considerable pause that that's what's happened. Is that a fair assessment? And if not, would you expand on that?
Yes, but it's early days. It doesn't feel like it because it's been 3 years, but it's still early days. Look, the 1.1, 1.2 million losses, they're not Putin's losses. He's put the people in, but it doesn't hurt him. And as long as the Russian people are supine at best or complicit at worst, he can continue to do that. There's a report today of another 150,000 troops being put into the Donbass in order to try to push the Ukrainians out of their own territory. And that is troubling. But the Western Europeans, have begun to respond appropriately. They are supportive. The Poles are particularly, they know exactly what's at stake.
Yeah, they've had their airspace violated several times already by the Russians.
Everybody's airspace is violated. Sabotage is going on, murder, war crimes, of course, in Ukraine itself, and war crimes going on in the conquered part of Ukraine.
Right.
It's a terrible situation. But to respond to Mark, there are now serious sanctions that are being put on Russia. And they are hurting Russia a lot. I think that their economy is not good and getting worse. Furthermore, the Ukrainians, through their drone programs, have been attacking the Russian oil and gas infrastructure pretty successfully. And that's all that Russia's really got at this point. That's providing the money for them for their war machine. And the Ukrainians, I think, are attacking it, are going to continue to attack it. And they've done well. I won't bother to recount to you the successes they've had, but I remind you that the Russians at the early going here thought that they could make the Black Sea a Russian-controlled lake, and they have failed in that. So strategically, I think that time is not on the Russian side, but they're trying to inflict as much pain as possible in this window to make the Ukrainians surrender because they just can't stand it anymore. And the Ukrainian winter is pretty harsh, and that's going on right now.
And you also have the lack of, oil. President Trump negotiated a deal with the Indians to stop buying Russian oil, which is basically laundering it for the Western Europeans who are buying it back from the Indians. And so now he realizes China is really the only vendor on the world stage that's willing to buy their oil. And I think the president floated the idea of sending Tomahawk missiles to the Ukrainians. I think that'd be a fabulous thing if the Ukrainians had Tomahawk missiles. That would give them offensive capabilities, to lob a few into Moscow, frankly.
Well, militarily, it's the only decision you can make because if the Russians have impunity, and they can just inflict this harm in any part of Ukraine that they choose to, and have impunity from their own areas, why shouldn't they just keep it up as long as the Russians will continue to lose their husbands and their sons? And the Russian peoples, I think, are being made a criminal nation, that they are complicit to this. There will be a price to be paid for this up the road. They're paying that price now, but there will be a worse price up the road. They're really a pariah nation at this point. They don't have anybody behind them except the Chinese. And ultimately, if the Russians can be kept in the war and made weaker and weaker and weaker, sooner or later, the Chinese are casting a baleful eye at Eastern Russia and Siberia. I think the Russians know this, frankly, but Putin has got them in a box. They're committed now to the war.
And you also have the massive casualties. Is what CSIS estimates close to 1 million casualties, 250 deaths. I mean, that's almost like you're getting real close to Afghan numbers, frankly. with their Soviets in Afghanistan, those types of numbers. And I'm surprised there's no real groundswell of the average Russians like they were during when the Soviets invasion of Afghanistan. Towards the end, you did have people that were protesting, So,
Well, I think the Russians know that that their government is run by a criminal gang.
mhm.
Navalny was put into prison and murdered, and he was in opposition to Putin. I just read today that some young girl who dared to do anti-war songs has now been put into jail. And these things are pointless, other than the fact that they're sending a message to the Russian people: put your head up, and this is what happens to you. So there's a price to be paid. But I remind you that in 1991, the Russian people came out in Red Square and fought for a democracy for their country. And Gorbachev was opening things up. Yeltsin led that way afterwards. It's just a sad experience, Russian experience, that Putin comes in behind that and reverses history. And that's what he's been doing.
So let me kind of expand on, Dwight mentioned the Tomahawks. A number of months ago, there was some discussion about the Germans furnishing, I think the Taurus missile, which they make. It's not an American product, which is an offensive weapon, potentially going after the bridge to Ukraine, of course, Ukraine, to Crimea, which would be obviously one of the major supply lines that they have. I'm getting a little granular on some of the military issues, but and there's some other potential targets that have been mooted by some folks. I'm looking at a list that comes from the Hudson Institute. This is all in that category of giving the Ukrainians the ability to be more offensive. Is that take more offensive steps? Is that a direction we ought to think about? And do you think that would be more effective as well?
Well, a few minutes ago, I said that was the only possible military decision. But you can't ignore the political overlay, which is that the Russians are threatening to escalate if these missiles are used in such a way as to attack Russia proper. For example, that Tomahawk might be able to get to the Kremlin, actually, and that they may very well escalate to nuclear weapons. I personally don't think they can or they will, but they're threatening it every day. I just gave a speech, as I had mentioned to you before we came on, that I gave a speech in Geneva and pointed out that Putin was threatening nuclear weapons, both tactical and strategic. And I asked the rhetorical question: what kind of person does that? Well, what kind of person would actually breach that and begin a nuclear war in Europe? And the answer is a person who is so certain that he wants to win that he's delusional, and he'll pay any price, anybody else's price, in order to achieve his political goals. That's on the other side of the ledger. Now, President Biden clearly was intimidated by that and did not act at all. President Trump, I think, is not intimidated by that. Medvedev, who is an insane person, at least he behaves that way, next to Putin, threatened a nuclear launch. And President Trump said, well, I've got 2 nuclear submarines right off your coast right now. And so, Medvedev was bluffing, and Trump's bluffing. Nobody wants to see a nuclear exchange, but I think the message back to the Russians that they don't just control everything here was a good message by Trump.
Some of the other targets are severing some of the pipeline connections with the Power of Siberia with China and the Volga-Don Canal. I mean, there are a number of specific targets in Russia that have been suggested as being, but again, it all runs into this issue of the risks associated with escalation and the extent to which the West is willing to go down that road.
Well, Mark, I want to make this political point. The question is, against that risk on that one side,
right?
What do you have on the other side? And that was a point that I also made in Geneva. The Russians simply cannot win, cannot be permitted to win in Ukraine. Because if they do, they're at that point on the road to doing exactly what Putin has said that he wants to do, which I laid out a few minutes ago.
Right.
And what is really at stake in the long run here is the design of the world in the 21st century. Are we going to have a world that looks to the standards set down by the United States, by those in the Declaration of Rights in the UN, by the program of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, which has set down principles that, by the way, the Russians have agreed to since the end of the end of the 70s.
Right.
Are we going to have that kind of world? Do we want a world in which citizens can be picked up and murdered or put into icy prison camps? Is that the kind of world that we want to have? And that is the world that the Russians and the Chinese are determined to create. No question in my mind about it. They definitely are engaged in an effort to create that world. We must recognize that we can't permit that world to exist. We just simply cannot. And I might point out that anybody that thinks that we can exist over here in America and run our high value world while the rest of the world becomes an authoritarian dictatorship under one or more people is kidding themselves. They cannot in the long run coexist with us. They know that now. They're not coexisting with us now. So this is a global conflict in my view. And that's what's at stake against the risk that the Russians will engage in a nuclear war. That's not a lot different than the risk that we were running during the Cold War, by the way.
Yeah, and we see, Putin's shown, his intentions. He is very much interested in Poland as well as some of the Eastern European countries. He's been kind of sabering with them for years. Latvia, Georgia, the Balkans, they're next, and I think the problem is I hate to say it, the world kind of like Joe Biden did nothing for leadership when this happened. He did nothing at all. He basically thought sanctions would rule the day, but you need to arm the resistance the way we armed UNITA in Angola, the way we armed the Contras in Nicaragua. We've supported freedom movements like Solidarity in Poland, and we've done none of that.
And don't forget the Mujahideen in Afghanistan and the support of them, even surreptitiously, was enough to actually beat the Russians. They had to withdraw from Afghanistan.
Yeah. I mean, there's no Democrat Charlie Wilson these days. But I mean, it's just what do you see the outlooks of the Russian economy moving forward? I mean, we're getting into the winter months. Do you think Putin will be at a point where he'll have to come to the negotiating table come spring, or do you think he just keeps going and sending North Korean troops and more prisoners out of his gulags?
I think it's unforeseeable how much pressure has to be put on the Russians to bring them to heal. And I want to just say one more time, this is all constant discussion. We got to get Putin to the negotiating table. Got to give him the negotiating table. For what? If you send him a message today that you'll grant all of his wishes, he'll run to the negotiating table this afternoon. The goal is not to get him to the negotiating table. The goal is to get him the hell out of Ukraine and to stop trying to achieve this political goal that he has to reassemble the Russian Empire and to intimidate Europe and thereby weaken the world leadership of the United States of America. And that's his goal. And it's the Chinese goal, by the way. The Chinese are just smarter than the Russians. They haven't pulled the trigger yet. Putin pulled the trigger and thus cut off a lot of his options. The Chinese are still watching to see what their best chess move is.
And I guess the glass half full interpretation would be that the failure of the Russian military may well have given Xi some pause. He hasn't been all that trusting of his own military. I mean, some of the leadership changes that he's made, that perhaps he was more reluctant now to do what he might have wanted to do in Taiwan. We can, again, that's a more glass half full interpretation as to the X's response to that.
All this hinges on the staying power of the Ukrainians, bottom
Yes.
line.
Yeah.
If they have staying power, and by the way, they don't have any options. You see, they communicated this to me, and it's not mysterious. They have no options. They are fighting for their lives. Yes, for their sovereignty of their nation and all that. That's a nice thing, and I suppose you can always give up your country, but that they understand very well that a good portion of their population will be either murdered or put into prison camps. They know this, and they don't want that, so they're fighting for their lives. Don't ask me.
Yeah, and I tell you, speaks to the Ukrainian spirit, the fact that they've been able to hold on this long. I mean, experts were saying they'll be in Kiev in a matter of weeks, and here we are. What, 3 years later now? 4 years later, coming up on 4 years, I think. So I mean, it is, and I do really think we do need to arm the Ukrainians. We need to give them the guns. We need to give them the missiles, so they can basically inflict pain on the everyday Russians. I mean, let's say they're they actually hit a neighborhood or something like that. I mean, you got to take the war. Sometimes, war is a messy thing. You do need to take the war to the people so they'll rise up and so on. I mean, my example is not the best example.
I would say we have a bunch of very attractive military targets before we reach that point.
Yeah, no, I mean, like President Nixon, when he started the bombings, in North Vietnam. I mean, granted, not the best example, but it did bring the North Vietnamese to the bargaining table, so to speak. And
it's interesting you mention that, because Henry Kissinger has written quite a bit about negotiations, and I'm kind of struck by some of his observations, and with what Ambassador Gilmore has talked about with Putin's intentions or lack of intentions. And one of the observations of Kissinger is that for negotiations to be successful, both sides or all sides need to have a sense that if the negotiations fail, they'll be a loser. And so that when he's been in mediation helping initiate negotiations, again, from a variety of perspectives, that dynamic of all sides having a sense that they had a common stake in the outcome because the alternative was worse.
Yeah, and that was the genius of the madman strategy.
That's we're not just talking about Vietnam, though. It's sort of Middle East and whatever. But the point is that your point is, I think, that with Putin's certainly not at that point where he sees the failure of negotiations as being an unacceptable outcome. He just sees, I go back to Moscow or I go back to wherever, and things continue. So how we create that dynamic with the Russians, are you suggesting, let me pivot to an actual question, that we need regime change before there's a change in the Russian stake, where the political dynamic has to transform before we can really see an end of the war?
I believe the political goal of the West and of the United States in the long run ought to be regime change in Russia. I think that we will never be safe as long as this gang is in charge of the Russian state. That, I believe, ought to be our political goal: military, diplomatic, economic, messaging. All these things are in service to a political goal. That's not always understood. Everybody thinks about war, and you toss politics aside once war starts. That's not true. As Clausewitz said, war is politics. And that ought to be our ultimate objective. But I'll throw out something that I haven't said to anybody else before. I'll say it to you, Mark. Here's what I'd do tomorrow if I were the president. I'd direct the Secretary of State to utilize the OSCE, and I would. First of all, they don't even have an ambassador there yet. But I'd get an ambassador in there right away. And then I would, the Secretary of State ought to take a personal hand into it, which Secretary Pompeo never did. And I'd go into the OSCE and I would make it very flamboyant and I'd give a speech. And I would say, look, here's the deal. We are not going to allow Russia to conquer Ukraine. End of story. That's it. Not going to happen. The Germans, the Poles, the French, the Spanish, the British, we all agree it's not going to happen. But here's something that could happen. All of the members of the OSCE here, all 56 countries, including the Belarus, including all these people, will issue a guarantee to Russia. We will guarantee their territorial integrity, which, by the way, is guaranteed in 4 or 5 of the documents that the Russians walk on. But you're just to return to it and say, look, we'll guarantee your territorial integrity. You've been complaining that Ukraine is run by Nazis and that somehow they're some vague threat to Russia, which they're not. All this is just made up stuff. But at this point, it's very flamboyant. Just put out there in the governments and the press of 57 other countries, and say that we're prepared to issue a guarantee of the territorial integrity of Russia if they will withdraw to their borders. Now, that would be a real problem for Putin. He doesn't want to do that. But what a message to the Russian people who have been lied to. And they've been said that they're under some sort of threat, and they're prepared to actually give the lives of their sons and husbands for what? Particularly in light of that proposal. And I'd put it out there in the OSCE, not NATO or even the UN. Or you could do it in the UN too. The rest of the world would probably cheerfully embrace it. But, this is a European war. You could start at the OSCE and put that out there, and that would create a real political problem for Putin. I remind everybody on this show that this war in Europe is a political problem, not a military one. And that would be a good thing to do. I wonder if anybody in Washington is watching this. Dwight, make sure somebody sees this.
Well, yeah, good idea.
Yeah.
Well, you raised politics, and so maybe that's the time to I know Dwight is chomping at the bit to ask you about, I think you had an election in Virginia, did you not? Yes, you did.
Yeah, we did. Yeah, we had an election in Virginia. We sure did.
I cannot believe Virginians voted for Jay Jones. You've got a attorney general who wanted to kill the speaker with 2 bullets. Watch him have the speaker watch his kids die in front of him and wife, and they still. What is wrong with Virginia voters? I mean, and they voted for. I mean, now parents have basically themselves to blame when Abigail Spanberger starts letting men into girls' locker rooms and vice versa. It's just mad. What has happened to the Old Dominion?
Well, let me say maybe 3 things. Number one, we've been, I think, made kind of neutralized about flamboyant statements in politics over the last number of years. There's an awful lot of crazy stuff that's been said in American politics. And after a while, people have begun to say, stop saying, oh my God, why did they say that? People are now, I think, beginning to kind of routinize all this kind of thing. That's a new idea too, that I've never put out anywhere else, but I think that some of that's going on now. So let me turn to the real thing that happened here. And that's 2 things. Number one, the president said he wasn't on the ballot. He said the shutdown and the fact that he wasn't on the ballot. He was on the ballot. The Democrats put him on the ballot. There's no question about that. And so then, the fact is that he's done his doge. He's fired lots and lots of people. He's laid off lots and lots of people. He's furloughed lots of people. Northern Virginia has a very large contingent of government workers who aren't government workers anymore. And they're out there looking for a job and they can't find them. And they're mad. You could see it coming. And then let me finish that thought. I actually watch Fairfax County, and I watch it all the time in statewide elections. I watched it in previous state elections, and the votes in Fairfax County are Democrat to a very large number. The margin for the Democrat for Stan Panberger in Fairfax County this year was 200,000 votes. She only won by 500,000 votes. Fairfax County put in 200,000 alone. And that doesn't even count Arlington, Alexandria, Prince William, Loudoun. And I didn't even look at that. But you have to look at Northern Virginia, and to jump to the end, you have to be in a position to win Northern Virginia. You have to be in a position to persuade the people of Northern Virginia that you're on their side. And that's what I did with the car tax. And that's what Youngkin did with this transgender stuff in the bathroom stuff. He persuaded the people in Northern Virginia he was on their side. And we both won. So that's the first thing that you have to think about. The second thing, and by the way, this business of state federal workers extends deeply into Hampton Roads, Virginia Beach, Newport News, Chesapeake.
Yeah.
So that is part of it. The second thing is that I want to point out, and to respond to Mark, there's just not that much ticket splitting going on right now. Spanberger pulled the other two in. There's no doubt about that, right? Yeah. They tied to her, and she pulled them in. She beat the Republican by 15. And then the Attorney General candidate, who nobody knew, I mean, I can barely call her name, and she won. She won by 10.
Hashmi, the lieutenant governor. Yeah,
the lieutenant governor.
Yeah, and she had the basement strategy where she wouldn't even debate the Republican anywhere. She didn't even want to debate him.
She didn't campaign at all. And John Reed, a personal friend of mine who I supported, ran a vigorous,
he was everywhere,
unfunded. And frankly, I thought he might make it, but he lost by 10. And then the Attorney General, the incumbent Attorney General, Mieres, I thought that was a no-brain re-election. I thought that was certain. He lost by 5 to this Jay Jones guy. Jay Jones was pulled in by the big margins on top of him there, and just couple that with what was going on in Northern Virginia. That's what the people in Northern Virginia didn't care about that, Mark. They thought they cared about the fact that last week they were employed in a federal job, and this week they can't feed their families. That's fact. And they were going to vote for Jay Jones if he'd actually committed the murder. So there you go.
Yeah, I tell you, he got away with going 100 miles out on 64 with just getting community service working for himself.
What can I say? I never counsel these folks. I'm not smarter than they are. These are the people that ran their own campaigns. I guess maybe I would have suggested to Jason that he couple his attacks, which seemed to have traction, with the positive message of why he should be Attorney General again. And in the end, he spent all of his money really attacking Jay Jones. It looked like it would work. I guess you all thought it would work. I thought it would work.
Yeah,
but it didn't work. And I guess people went to the polls and said, we got a real good reason to vote for the Democrats. I'm not sure we got a real good reason to vote for the Republicans this year.
I was
going to say that typically you look to Virginia, historically, as having more, for lack of a better word, gentlemanly, more genteel politics, kind of a moderate tone to it. And so for those of us outside the state, it did seem to be a real change for this. The Jay Jones, it seems like a kind of pivot point where the politics is that much more partisan, much more, frankly, divisive than has been Virginia politics in the past. It'll be interesting to see whether or not that continues. But it does seem that there was a lot of straight ticket voting that made the difference on this.
And also, I think Virginia.
I don't think Virginia politics is particularly genteel. I think gentility went out with Mills Godwin, his first term. I think that politics in Virginia is pretty cutthroat myself, but I was there cutting some of the throats, so
But I mean, also I think the other problem is in the last 20 years, we've seen a lot of people from Maryland, especially in my county, Montgomery County, moving to Fairfax. They're moving to McLean. This is, I mean, you guys, when you ran for governor, you ran the tables in Fairfax County, as did Governor Allen. I think Bob McDonnell may have been the last Republican to win Fairfax County. And I think it's just so many Democrats just moved over there, with, I mean, this is like kind of the double-edged sword of economic prosperity in Northern Virginia, the tech corridor and so on. A lot of liberal Democrats moving to Virginia. And
Look, you can do it as I've explained many times. I basically lived in Alexandria for quite a long time,
Mhm.
and I really like Northern Virginia a lot,
Mhm.
and I like the people of Northern Virginia a lot. But you got to give them a reason to abandon the Democrats, or they're going to vote Democrat. And people have said that Virginia is a purple state. Virginia is not a purple state. Virginia is a blue state. Make no mistake about it.
Yeah. And North Carolina is trending purple too these days. I mean, that's another state where it was a reliable red state for years and years and years. Jesse Helms and Locke Faircloth would win re-election without any issues at all. Wouldn't even be
John
close.
Edwards and a number of governors. So it's been more competitive.
Yes.
And it's interesting. One of the phenomena is that nationally, the more upper income but also higher education counties like Fairfax or Montgomery as well have moved more Democratic, more liberal, whereas the sort of traditional West Virginia being kind of the counter cycle where it's more downscale and historically a union state and has shifted towards Republican. So we're
We might
seeing
lose a quarter of our state to West Virginia, as would. Did they invite part of Western Virginia to join West Virginia?
I was going to say, so we're seeing something of a realignment taking place demographically that's probably created more headwinds in Virginia. We'll see.
Well, you've now told me Marylanders are moving to Virginia, so I personally blame you two guys for this.
Okay. Hey, we try. We've gotten Republicans elected in Maryland, and there was a woman. You probably know her, Ellen Ratner.
Yeah.
She was a columnist. She used to be on NET she was the Democrat on NET. And I remember when she used to live in Maryland. And when Bob Ehrlich was elected governor in 2002, she said, I put my house on sale the night he was declared governor. I can no longer live in a state. She moved to Northern Virginia, not Northern Virginia, Northwest DC as a result of that. Ellen Ratner.
So let me come back and talk. We were talking a little before the show about the consequences of the shutdown. We've certainly seen a division of sorts within the Democratic Party. We could speculate as to how unpopular the 8 were, but you did have Tim Kaine as one of the 8 Democrats who voted to reopen the government. What are your thoughts about how that played? Is that something that was a reflection of the number of federal workers in there, or is there something more that should be read into that?
No, that's what you should. That's what happened. We've just had this conversation about tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of people in Northern Virginia connected to the federal government. Look, I talked about the layoffs, the firings, the furloughs, and with the shutdown, everybody that was in any way connected to the federal government suffered, including, of course, as we know, the famous discussion about people with the SNAP food stamp program and all that. Everybody was affected by that. So the question is, who's going to be blamed for that? And that was the fight that was going on in Congress. Each of them was trying to blame the other party. And I personally think that the people of Northern Virginia demonstrated that they blamed the Republicans. After all, who's president? The Republican. Who's in the majority in the Senate? The Republicans. Who's in the majority in the House of Representatives? The Republicans. But I think that Tim Kaine, I haven't talked to him, but if he's going to be a senator, he has to represent these folks. and I'll bet you his phone and mail was burning up from Northern Virginia and the rest of Virginia too. And at some point, I think he decided that his best representation was to end the shutdown. Now, the interesting thing is contrasted with Mark Warner. Mark Warner, who stuck with the Democrats on this and decided to keep the shutdown going, has done a little video in which he explained his position. And his position is we're not going to give up this health care benefits that the Obamacare people put in during the epidemic, during the COVID, and the big break that people got on their health care. We're going to, they're going to have to give that up. That's going to increase their premiums. And I'm going to represent Virginians in that way. And that's what he said he was doing. I think the jury is out on this, and we're talking about senators, so they don't have to run very often. But I think that Mark Warner is coming up sooner than Tim Kaine. Tim Kaine just got elected. So that's the political dynamic there. And I think that the story remains to be told about that. Meanwhile, by the way, you got to keep your eye on the House of Representatives. Now that's coming up next year. And not just in Virginia, but nationwide. And, you got
people like our governor who's trying to wipe out our one lone Republican.
Well,
and
they're trying in Virginia to wipe out at least 3 Republicans.
Yeah. I tell you, if they are successful, what's her name? Kay Higgins.
Higgins, Virginia Beach.
Oh, yeah, she would be target number 1. I mean, she's won re-election, but it's always been like a thin margin. I think it was like she's never really run away with it because of the way Virginia Beach and that whole area, that district, because I think that used to be George Allen's home district years ago when he was in Congress.
No, I think he was further uptown, but Illyria, who was former Congresswoman Illyria, who Higgins beat, just announced today that she's going to run for re-election in that district. And the bellwether here that I think the Republicans ought to be worried about, I'm worried about, is when I was governor, I fought like a tiger to bring the first majority into the House of Delegates, the lower house in Virginia. And through amazing, relentless effort, we won. We did that. I actually did a couple other things to get us over the top there. We just lost, I think, 14 seats. Yeah. In the House of Delegates. The score now is something like 65-34 or something like that in the House of Delegates. Yeah. It's a super majority in the Democrats. If that is a bellwether for Virginia and for Maryland and for the nation, the House of Representatives could go Democrat next year.
I mean, look at you don't have a single elected Republican from Northern Virginia for years. I think Ken Cuccinelli may have been the last Northern Virginia Republican, but now you go past the Rappahannock River and there are no Republicans there to be seen either.
You're going to have to engage in a treasure hunt to find a Republican right now in the House of Delegates.
Yeah.
So there are a couple of them there, but I campaigned personally for Chad Green down in the Williamsburg area. I thought he was a sure reelect. He lost. There are delegates that have been there 30 years as Republicans that lost. And it was just a murderous wipeout. Now, I want to say this. I've run statewide multiple times, and that is no easy thing to do. And if you're down in money, it's a horrible thing to try to do. And so I'm not the person that wants to beat up on Winsome Sears here. I think she's entitled to a lot of credit for running. But the truth is that she never was able to settle on a message or a theme that caught the attention of the people of Virginia. And, once again, if you don't give a message to the people of Virginia as to why you should elect the Republican, they're now going to elect the Democrat. And that's what they just did.
So we're coming up towards the normal end of the show, and we wanted to give you an opportunity. I know you've been, I get emails regularly from you about some of the radio appearances you have and the columns. Where can we get more of Jim Gilmore? GilmoreAmbassador@gmail.com is an email for me, political email.
I'm on LinkedIn and Facebook, and we put stories that we think are important and news articles we think are important that support my theme
Right.
on all the time. So you can do all that. Meanwhile, I'm speaking and writing quite a bit. This coming Friday, I'll do a symposium at George Mason University.
Yeah, our friend Garrett's leading the effort on that one.
Yeah, you wrote me into that personally.
Yeah,
So
glad to do that.
You'll be glad.
So I'm doing that, and then another important meeting is next Wednesday at Georgetown University, where I've been asked to participate and give a talk and participate on a panel on the question of Russia just trying to destroy Ukraine culturally and the people themselves. And I'm going to be talking about that.
We have a young writer who goes to Georgetown. We'll have to make sure he attends and says hello. His name is Ian Schwartz. Yeah.
Well, that's an open meeting, so he could come to that.
Yeah, he's a psychology major at Georgetown. He wants to go into law school after that.
Well, thank you very much, and we look forward to following your writings and your media appearances as they come up.
Well, I'm doing it because I'm out of office now. I have a free voice, and I can say anything I want to say. And this is my way of trying to help the United States of America, and that's what I'm trying to do with the strength of my experience as governor and ambassador.
And one other invitation to extend to you, Governor, if you're available. I know you're in Richmond. It's hard to get up here, but on December 7th, it's Sunday, we're doing a charity Christmas party for our club. It's along with the Women's Federation in Montgomery County, the Chevy Chase Women. It's a Toys for Tots event we do. If you're free, it's in Bethesda, so you don't have to go deep into Maryland. Try and stop by.
You're very kind to issue the invitation. I'll see if I can get up there.
I'll send you the details. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Dwight.
Good evening. Take care. Good night.
Let's go down to Missoni, where Italian cuisine shines.